Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
Oh, doing just fine. It's starting to get a little break in the temperatures.
Yep. September is here.
It is here, so that's very good from my perspective.
I agree. It's starting to turn a little more pleasant outside. Scott, I wanted to mention right at the top of this, I introduced us as co-founders of Compass, and this week is our birthday week.
Happy birthday to us.
Happy birthday to us. Compass is 6 years old. As of this past week, we started publishing at the beginning of September 2018. You remember 2018?
Oh boy, not much.
I was still in my 40s then.
I was in my 50s, so
yeah. It's been a little while. A lot of ups and downs. Been through a lot. We've written about a lot of things. I find myself we've written about so many things that I forget them sometimes. I have to think, did we cover that? And I go back and I find this story. I'm like, okay, right. Yes, we did write about that back in 2020 or whatever.
Yeah. In fact, that happened this past week to me. There was the approval of a natural gas line being installed. That's going to go through South Knox, very small portion of South Knox County. I said, wait a minute. Didn't I write about that before? And I looked it up.
Familiar. Yeah, well, that's what happens one day at a time. So I would especially like to thank all of you out there who are our subscribers who have made this possible for the last 6 years, because this is what we do. This is our job.
Yeah, believe it or not. And we're a subscription based website, so that's that's our source of income. So we certainly appreciate it. You guys have allowed us to put 6 candles on our cake. So
that's right. We've gotten little grayer. My hairs are grayer and fewer.
Mine are definitely fewer.
But we're still here, still going, and it's kind of amazing to me that.
6 years ago, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to make it 1 year. So,
I'm still not sure if we're going to be able to make it 1 year, and yet we persist. So yes, thanks to all. If you are a podcast listener but not a subscriber, this is an excellent time to help support our ongoing work, and you can find subscription information at CompassKnox.com. All right, well, let's talk about some things. A bunch of interesting stuff happened this week. We are going to talk about a national story that had a strong and interesting Tennessee connection, having to do with a Russian propaganda effort headquartered in Nashville. On a more local, maybe prosaic, but still very important level, there are some plans to improve safety on Chapman Highway. The Knox County Republican Party has a new victory fund that it is using to try to tamp down Democratic gains here locally. We'll talk about that a little bit. We have talked a lot about the new downtown stadium, which just last week we mentioned has a name, Covenant Health Park, but there has been a lot of interest from real estate speculators and developers in the areas right around the stadium. A lot of that property been changing hands ahead of various future developments. We'll talk about that a little bit. But to start us off, this past week was Reorganization Week, which I know doesn't sound very exciting and actually arguably isn't very exciting, but it is a significant week on the civic calendar. This was the week that the new Knox County office holders were sworn into office, because Knox County terms start on September 1st of the year that the election is held. Of course, the election was in August, and a whole bunch of new faces taking office. There are, of course, at the countywide level, only two countywide offices were elected. David Book was reelected as county law director. He did not even come to the swearing-in ceremony because he had actually already been sworn in the prior week. Because the terms start on September 1st, he went ahead and got sworn in so that there wouldn't be any break in his term in office. The swearing-in ceremony wasn't held till the 3rd because of the way the dates fell over the Labor Day weekend. Phil Ballard, property assessor, coming back into office. He's a familiar face and name in that office, which has the important job of appraising and assessing property value and basically setting everybody's tax bills across the county. He served in the office from 2008 to 2016 and is now back after having been out. But the big news, the changes really happened on the two county legislative bodies, County Commission and the School Board. There were 7 seats up for election on County Commission. Only 2 incumbents ran. Both of those incumbents got reelected. That's Terry Hill, Republican in the 6th District, and Courtney Durrett, Democrat in the 2nd District. But that means the other 5 are all new. And on an 11-member board, turning over 5 people is a lot. It means almost half of the people on County Commission are doing everything for the first time. every vote they take, and when we come up to the budget next year, it's going to be the first budget they've been through. So this whole coming year is going to be, a certain amount of breaking in for the new office holders, Scott. And I always think it's interesting. I mean, I guess, within the realm of things that we cover anyway, like I said, that this is sort of interesting in a boring way, but there's an element here, right, of sports coverage where partly you're just interested to see who are the new faces, and what's the team going to be like with all of these new people on it.
Yeah, it's watching the dynamics of how they interact is always interesting. Some people come into office and they kind of sit back. They don't talk a lot. They watch, observe. Others come in guns a-blazing, and they're weighing in on every issue and whether they know much about it or not. And they're and then over time, things kind of smooth out with both those types. And but yeah, it's always interesting to see how the people, especially after you watch them campaign. You watch them campaign, you follow what they say and how they act, and it's interesting to see how that translates to when they're actually in office and actually have the responsibility that they had sought. Right.
Yes, it's a lot easier to say things on the campaign trail than it is to come into office and do any of them. Mm-hmm. There's both. there's the political and explicitly partisan dimensions of this. So in the case of county commission, there was the one seat that Democrats flipped, the 4th district seat, very narrow win there for Shane Jackson. So now there are 3 Democrats on county commission instead of 2. That's still obviously quite a minority of the 11-member commission. That leaves 8 Republicans. So not a huge partisan shift there, but especially on these local bodies, personalities matter too, and seeing kind of who is able to build alliances and support with other people on the body, because on all of these bodies, and this is true of city council as well, obviously, you can't do anything without a majority of votes, and you can't just assume because people are of the same party or maybe have the same basis of support or whatever that they're going to automatically support the same things. A lot of it does come down to personalities, and we saw that on county commission a few years ago when Courtney Durrett actually managed to get elected chair of commission for a year, even though at the time she was one of 2 Democrats. But the thing that mattered more in that instance was for the first time in commission's history, there was a majority of women on commission, and she was, they decided we're going to have a woman commissioner, and she was the one they chose. There is still a majority of women on county commission now, the same 6-5 majority, even with all the changes, and some seats went from being represented by a man to a woman and vice versa, but it still shakes out. There's still a 6-woman majority on commission, and we still have a woman chair. In their reorganization, Terry Hill had been serving as chair. She said she didn't want to do it for another year. And so Gina Oster, commissioner who had been serving as vice chair under Hill, she put herself forward to be chair and was unanimously named to the seat. So she is the commission chair for the next year. County Commissioner Kim Frazier, who's one of the 2 at-large commissioners, she is now vice chair. And I don't think that was a surprise to anybody, because Frazier is very well organized. She has been a very active commissioner in her first 2 years, and she's also pretty politically skillful, and she has worked closely with lots of other commissioners, including Democrats on commission, even though she's a Republican. And so the fact that she would want to be vice chair, kind of take on that somewhat higher visibility, and also that she would have the support to do that, I don't think was a surprise. But this does mean for the 3rd year running, both the chair and vice chair of commission are women. And that, before Durrett, I don't think that there had never been a woman chair of commission before. And now we've had 3 in a row.
Yeah.
So that, just kind of, and it doesn't, what does that mean? I mean, at this point, I think what it means is we can stop commenting on it, really, because by the time you get to the first woman or minority group or anything to hold any office is always notable. The second is always kind of notable because it's like, okay, this was not just a kind of one-off break with tradition or whatever. By the time you get to the third, it starts to be like, okay, well, this is, all of our, and this is true of all of our local bodies now, they all actually have women majorities, the school board, county commission, and city council. And so I think 100 years after women achieved the right to vote, the constitutional amendment, we've finally reached a point where, at least at the local level in Knoxville and Knox County, it is not notable for there to be a balance of women or men. It won't be, if we now shift back to having like a male majority on any of these bodies, I think that also won't be notable anymore because it's clear that that is not really a factor at the local level.
Yeah, I can't tell you the last time I mentioned in an article or the email that a majority of city council members are women.
Right.
It's just the way it is, the way it has been.
Yeah.
So
and that also, I mean, the vice mayors, the last two vice mayors have both been men on council. So it doesn't mean that because there's a majority of women that, I think, it just kind of becomes normal. So a couple of interesting things on commission, though, even though it does have that 8-3 Republican-Democratic split. The Republicans on commission are certainly not a unified bloc, and it's going to be interesting to see how their votes shake out, particularly when it comes to a couple of areas. One is land use and zoning and development, which is really, apart from the budget every year, those are the most consistently divisive and contentious issues that County Commission deals with. Several of the new commissioners and several of the new Republican commissioners who were elected this year ran on not exactly anti-development platforms, but let's say on platforms that prioritize the interests of existing communities and residents over the interests of developers, people who were elected with a lot of support from neighborhood groups, community organizations, and so forth. Definitely Angela Russell in the 5th District of Farragut. That seat has often been held by people who come out of the ranks of sort of homeowner associations in West Knoxville. They tend to be fairly skeptical of anything that's going to bring a lot of new growth or density in those areas. Andy Fox, Republican in the 9th District, certainly also, he's made very clear he wants to minimize density, especially in the areas outside the city in South Knox County. Kim Fraser, who's now the vice chair of commission, she comes from the Planning Alliance and again is very focused on what she would call smart growth, but on balancing the needs and interests of local residents. Interestingly, the Democrats on commission tend to be a little more development friendly, partly because they represent more urban areas that are mostly already pretty built up. So a lot of the new developments that get proposed are not actually in their districts, but also they see the need, they emphasize the need for more housing, more kinds of development to try to address the housing shortage. So I think one thing we're likely to see on commission with this new lineup is a little more, you're going to have bipartisan votes where if there's a contentious development, if it gets approved, it'll probably get approved with some of the Republican votes and some of the Democratic votes. The other thing to watch there on commission, I think, is the kind of culture war issues, which have typically not been a major focus for county commission. They have had one commissioner, Rhonda Lee, over the last couple of years, who has tried to push those a little bit, and she's been kind of sidelined by her colleagues. But going back to Fox and Russell, they both come in with a little bit more, Fox, I would say a lot more, of a very conservative Christian culture warrior view of things. And you talk about people who come in with guns blazing. I think we're going to see that with Andy Fox pretty quickly, right out the gate. He's going to be trying to push some of those. And it'll be interesting to see how much support for those kinds of issues he and Lee can muster from the other Republicans on commission. Also just wanted to mention that the school board had their reorganization. Nothing changed there. Betsy Henderson's still the chair. Steve Triplett still the vice chair. The only real thing that changed with this election on the school board, first of all, they do have 3 new members, and really they have 4 new members if you go back to the beginning of the year, because Travis Wright was appointed in March to complete Mike McMillan's term in the 8th District after McMillan died, and then Wright was elected to a full term in August. So really we've turned over 4 school board members now, again, almost half of the body, because it's a 9-member board. And it was already a sort of 5-4 quasi-partisan split there, because you had 5 Republicans. Prior to this election, you had 2 Democrats and 2 independents. Both of those seats that were held by independents now held by Democrats. So you have a formal partisan divide, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. And I think we can anticipate continuing to see, especially on the more divisive issues, especially on issues having to do with, school vouchers, things that are of a more ideological nature, and also issues around banning books and how minority issues are treated by the school system and so forth. When you get into some of those more contentious issues, I think that 5-4 divide is going to make itself felt. I would argue that it kind of made itself felt this past week, because there were a couple of changes to policies that were proposed that were somewhat controversial, and some of the Democratic members of the board had raised questions about them. I'm not going to go into them right now because we'll be writing about these later in the month when they come up. But at Thursday's meeting, when those came up for a vote, Christie, who's one of the Republican members of the board, moved to postpone action on them, sent it back to policy review for further discussion so that everybody, including the new members, can kind of get their arms around them. But I think she was also doing the math, which was that Travis Wright, who's also one of the Republicans, was out of town for that school board meeting, and that meant that there were 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and this is something that the school board has been through several times in the last few years. If there's a contentious issue and one of the Republicans is out of town, they tend to end up with a 4-4 tie vote, and the thing doesn't get passed anyway. And so I think Christie was also sort of foreseeing that potentially happening here, and that divide is, I think, going to continue to be a defining feature of the school board. So those are our new board members and commissioners. We will certainly be talking about them more as they all settle into their roles and grapple with the various things that those bodies do. Scott, let's talk about development around the stadium. You wrote an interesting story. Of course, we focused a lot on the stadium itself, which is nearing completion, is going to be opening in the spring, and it has its own associated development that Boyd Sports is managing right around, the actual physical footprint of the stadium includes some private development, including residential development, but then the areas around the stadium outside of what Randy Boyd and his operations own, that has also been the site and sites of a lot of speculation and properties changing hands.
Yeah, it was interesting. The on the date when Boyd formally announced that the stadium was going to be named Covenant Health Park, he made a big deal about the development in the areas around the stadium. He said, "Oh, people are buying up land and doing this, that, and the other," and he said, "I'll let them talk about that." So I was like, "Well, okay, I'll take a look." And sure enough, there's a little bit of movement. Not a great deal that we hadn't already reported on. I mean, we'd already reported that, there's a hotel that's going to be scheduled to be built next to Barley's and in between Barley's and the stadium. So that's that was already there. But one interesting thing of note was that restaurateur Randy Burleson bought a
owner of Aubrey's and many other local restaurants.
Right. He bought a almost a block where the Buford Smith Company used to be. They're handling industrial goods. This is all the industrial / warehouse area anyway. And this is at the corner of Jackson Avenue and Randolph Street. It is diagonally across the intersection from what's going to be the east entrance of the stadium. I mean, it's right there. And so exchanged messages with him. It is funny. Developers are and business people are so try to be so coy about their intentions when their intentions are actually pretty obvious. And he Burleson, when I first asked him, I basically said, "Oh, we're just using that to store restaurant equipment, for our other new restaurants." And I'm sitting there going, "You paid $2.75 million for a warehouse, is what you're saying?" And I said, and I also pointed out, I'm not in the restaurant business, but that looks like a pretty good location to me, right by the stadium where a lot of people are going to be, and a lot of people are going to be living. Because remember, we've got those developments there. It's this
right. Storage is probably not going to remain its highest and best use.
Probably not. And lo and behold, one of the brands that he has is Fieldhouse Social, which is a sports bar. And who would think of putting a sports bar practically next door to a stadium.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any
sense whatsoever. Anyway, but he did say, eventually he did say, yeah, I'm basically going to wait and see what all Randy Boyd is going to do, because there's going to be a lot of there are going to be street facing businesses in the stadium itself. So he's going to wait to see kind of what shakes out before he makes it.
See what the landscape is, and maybe look for a fill a niche.
Yeah, and you remember, not only does Boyd is he developing those two residential buildings adjacent to the stadium, but he's got some other property. He's got the property where Burleson is, the property across Jackson, which the Randolph's name changes to Florida Street there, but it's on Florida and Jackson. Boyd's got that property. He's got a couple other buildings on Jackson across from the entrance to the stadium. So, there's a lot that could be going in down there. Another developer who's development group that's been real active down there is Dewhurst Properties. Dave Dewhurst and Mark Hines, of course, they've instrumental in redeveloping downtown. They were down there taking risks before anybody else thought it was prudent, and and they've done done a lot of work downtown. They have assembled property on Georgia Street. If you're not familiar with the area, like I said, there's Florida Street there on the edge of the stadium. The next street over is Georgia, and it dead end. And from Willow Avenue, it dead ends at First Creek, and there's industrial buildings there. They've assembled 4 of the 5 parcels. They spent about more than $6 million doing that over the last few years, couple of years, and they also own a couple of the lots across from the stadium entrance on Jackson, next to Boyd's property. So they're obviously going to be doing something. Talked to Dewhurst. He was a lot like Burleson in that he said, well, we're going to see what comes forward with this, and see what the market looks like before we make the plunge. One of the things that's interesting about that is, they primarily have done renovations, restorations, those kinds of things, and they would have to build. This would have to be new construction. These are old one-story businesses.
Right. The existing buildings aren't things that they're going to
repurpose. No, and but that is it would be a sizable development down there. It's probably the biggest area under single ownership. Other than the Knoxville Salvage folks have lots of property on the other side of the railroad tracks. Now the area right around the stadium is kind of limited too, because back when nobody wanted to locate there, KUB went in and they've got a huge facility over there now, and they own a lot of the property to the east of the stadium. So, and then I ran across one kind of interesting thing that was connected to Covenant Health. Again, was there's the wasn't known as the Fort Hill building, and it's up. It's not on Summit Hill Drive, but it fronts Summit Hill Drive. There's a little
kind of big bunker looking building up there.
Yeah, it's it's right next to the law enforcement credit union, but it's on the bluff, kind of the hill. And I don't know if I knew this before, but that's called Temperance Hill, where Green Mountain Academy is right at the summit of Temperance Hill. Anyway, but it's on the slope of Temperance Hill, directly overlooking the stadium. When you're sitting in the stadium, you look up to left center field, you see that building, and in 2018, the company that owns that building was SH Technologies, and they were going to convert it into a Tier 3 data center, which means Tier 3 is about as good as it gets. There's a Tier 4, Tier 3 data centers have a lot of security, a lot of redundancy, so they don't shut down ever. They can you can do maintenance on them and still do all your operations. So, very secure facility. But they got a payment in lieu of tax deal to help finance renovating that building and turning it from a kind of nondescript brick building to now kind of a black and gray monolithic looking building. But then I was looking at what was going on there, and when the payment in lieu of tax period ended last year, in those deals, the Industrial Development Board actually owns the property, so they have the deed to it. Well, at the end of it, they deeded the property over to Covenant Health's real estate arm, Fortress Corporation. So I was, what? Covenant Health is buying property overlooking the stadium that is now named after Covenant Health? And so I checked into that, and thinking, well, they might build an office building there with a logo and but actually, what it appears to be is, found out that during that pilot period, Covenant actually bought majority interest in SH Technologies, and SH Technologies, and they since rebranded to Ten Hats, TEN Hats. They actually do all of Covenant Health's data, which, as we all know, medical records are supposed to be highly confidential, very secure, all of that. They have other clients as well, but they do all of Covenant's work, and they also do after Covenant Health bought into them, they have the telehealth, their offices there in that building as well. I talked to them. Right now, they don't have any. There is room up there if they wanted to build anything. They could. There's plenty of room. It's the footprint of their corporate offices out at Fort Sanders West is smaller than the area that's available there, but they said they have no plans to do anything like that, and so there are other properties that could be under contract that we don't know about yet. Boyd seemed to indicate that there were several, not just Burleson, not just Dewhurst, but several people who are planning on making pretty sizable investments. We'll have to see, of course, and how that works out.
Well, and that was from the beginning of the stadium project, kind of sold as one of the benefits to the city, the community, et cetera, of the stadium, is that it would spur development around it, and then really that whole kind of quote-unquote warehouse district from the stadium across to Magnolia Avenue, and ultimately then kind of push more and more new investment out into East Knoxville, which is not a completely uncontroversial idea. There are people who have concerns about what that means for existing businesses and residents in some of those surrounding neighborhoods and so forth. But it does look like that is starting to happen. Yeah,
and one of the things that need to keep in mind, new developments, like, let's say Randy Burleson kind of goes off the deep end and builds the Fieldhouse Social there at the near the stadium. The increase in property taxes that the new development would create would go, first of all, to pay for the city's infrastructure improvements around the stadium. For instance, that east entrance is going to be right in front of it is going to be a plaza that the city is going to be paying for. And then second, will help pay off a loan of up to $20 million that Boyd is making to the Sports Authority to build the stadium that he envisioned. So that increase in tax revenues will go, toward like I said, the public infrastructure improvements and paying off the stadium.
Right. It's kind of there won't be quote unquote new property taxes for either the city or the county coming out of that immediate footprint for a while.
Yeah. I mean, well, there are taxes coming. Will be taxes coming out to the city and the county. They just are already.
They're accounted.
They're already accounted for, and they're already taken. So
right. All right. Well, speaking of funding, interesting little announcement this week from the Knox County Republican Party. Actually, the announcement came from Andrew Davis, who is former policy director for County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. He helped manage some of Congressman Tim Burchett's campaigns, and he has kind of been making himself into a player in local Republican politics. He's been involved with some local candidates' campaigns, and he's a strategy guy. And he, working with a bunch of local Republican office holders, ranging from Senator Marsha Blackburn to Burchett and Jacobs, and basically almost all of the Republicans in the I think all of the Republicans in the local legislative delegation, they all came together, chipped in money, and came up with $70,000 to form a fund to promote Republican candidates in Knox County and encourage Republican voters to get out and vote in Knox County. They're calling it the Victory Committee of the Knox County Republican Party. And Davis, who is essentially a freelance operator, he has his own Smoky Mountain Strategies consulting group, but he, for the short period from now until the November election, has been essentially hired in to run this under the auspices of the Republican Party. So this is an operation. It's a fund of the Knox County Republican Party. It didn't have to be separately established as a PAC or anything like that, but it's being managed by Davis. And I talked to him about it, and he said that what they're trying to do is just really boost and encourage Republican turnout in November in particular. And of course, the presidential races tend to be the elections where you get the highest turnout anyway. But he really wants to drive it up because there is a sense in the local Republican Party, and we talked about this a little bit coming out of the August elections, that their voters just haven't been as motivated as Democratic voters. They haven't been showing up. And Scott, you talked about this in some of your analysis of that August election. The gains that we saw for Democrats wasn't so much that there were a whole bunch of new Democrats voting as there were a lot fewer Republicans voting. And so I think that that's kind of what Davis is aiming at here.
Yeah, I think in losing the 4th District Commission seat, really was apparently a wake up call for Republicans. I know on election night, I was at the Republicans, election returns watch party at the Crown Plaza, and boy, there was a lot of concern.
Yeah,
a lot of concern that they were slipping.
When you had the 3rd District School Board seat was won by a Democrat, and that seat's currently held by a Republican on County Commission, but now that looks shaky too.
Yeah, so I think that and the long-standing kind of frustration that city council, which is a nonpartisan panel, but super majority of people who you would classify as progressives on there, and nobody who identifies as Republican is on the council. And so, I think that there's a lot of concern among those Republicans, and one thing that they some of the Republicans I've talked to are convinced of is that their biggest problem is Republican voters are not voting in local elections. They only care about the presidential race.
Right. And I think even in this November race, where, again, typically you are going to get your highest turnout, I think some of the concern from Republicans here is that, some people who might tend to vote Republican, maybe they're not super excited about Donald Trump this year, or who knows what, or maybe they just figure, look, Trump's going to win Tennessee anyway. Everybody assumes that. He's probably going to win Knox County, that people might not feel like there's a strong incentive to go out and vote. But there is at least one state legislative race, the 18th district, that, Democrats, Brian Goldberg, the Democratic candidate, is mounting a real challenge there to Elaine Davis, who's just finishing her first term. And, if Republicans are worried about anything locally in November, it's that. And I think they just want to make sure that let's get our people out there. And, what one of the frustrations that local Republicans have had is at the local level, the local party infrastructure level, there's a sense that the local party has not been super active or doing a whole lot. It's kind of gone back and forth. Current chair is Buddy Burkhart, who of course had held the seat before, and he's kind of, what you might call an old school local establishment Republican type. And it's kind of, leadership of the party has gone back and forth between him and then some newer, more firebrand candidates. We had Randy Pace and then Daniel Herrera running the party, who tried to make a lot of noise and stir things up, but really alienated a lot of the more establishment Republicans who kind of thought they didn't know what they were doing. And in the meantime, so there's just been a little bit of stasis and lack of direction from the local party. It hasn't necessarily needed to be really engaged because Republicans are a majority in the county. They hold all the countywide offices, and it can kind of be hard to get people super engaged with the party when it seems like it's doing just fine at the ballot box. But at the same time, the Knox County Democratic Party has been very focused and has been very active and organized. And I think there are Republicans, and I think Davis is one of them, who feel like the county Republicans need to get their rear in gear a little bit more, or they're going to suddenly wake up and be in a very competitive electoral landscape that they would like to avoid. Now, the difference in opinion, I think, between Davis and the local Democrats is Davis, and like you're saying, a lot of Republicans feel like they think their problem isn't that Knox County is sort of slowly shifting more purple. It's that Republicans aren't, we're still very Republican, like a lot of Republicans are just not bothering to vote. The case that the Democrats are making is that no, Knox County is shifting more purple, and this is what happens as areas urbanize more, get more built up, get denser populations. They do tend to shift a little more moderate and or even more Democratic. And so those are sort of like competing visions of what's going on in Knox County. And so I talked to Stuart Hall, the chair of the Knox County Democratic Party, and he kind of saw this victory fund as an indication that like what the Democrats are doing is working and it's getting the Republicans nervous. But he thinks that this isn't going to help them because he believes their problems run deeper than, we're just not getting our people out to vote enough, that actually there are more and more voters who are looking for alternatives beyond Republican Party. Anyway, $70,000 is not a tremendous amount of money in the electoral landscape. It's not. They're not going to focus it on just one campaign. It's going to be more about, trying to do broad messaging to Republicans, saying, "Hey, Knox County Republicans, elections coming up. Get out there, vote Republican, go team." We'll see if it has any kind of impact, and then also how any of that kind of effort carries over to early next year when Republicans will elect their next chair. And I think we can expect to see more of this kind of conversation at that point about what is the direction of the local Republican Party and how can it get more engaged and more active. Okay, let's talk about Chapman Highway. One of the first local nicknames that I learned when I first moved to Knoxville 30 years ago was somebody within the first few months of working in local journalism. I heard somebody use the phrase "Bloody Chapman." Chapman Highway has a long history of being known as a bit of an unsafe place for people, whether you're in vehicles or out of vehicles. The city of Knoxville has been working on various approaches to trying to make that corridor both safer and also friendlier to various kinds of development. And Scott, announcement this week of a pretty major grant that they're getting.
Yeah, it was a large grant. It's coming from the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program from the U.S. Department of Transportation. It is $17.8 million. The city has a match that they have to put in, and they'll end up paying for a $22.25 million project to improve safety from Blunt Avenue, where the Henley Bridge lands on the south side of the river, to basically Fort Dickerson Park, where Woodlawn Avenue comes in on the other side. They are going to be putting in some islands and medians in the middle of the street, hopefully slow traffic down a little bit through there and give it more of a boulevard type of feel. If you've been on Magnolia Avenue and seen some of the improvements they've made there, be very similar to that. The one thing that they're also excited about is on the western side of the highway, they're going to construct a dedicated bicycle/pedestrian pathway, and it'll be separated from the road itself. It's not just going to be, we've got bike lanes throughout the city where, there's just a, parking space width, maybe, lane marked off with paint. It's very easy to a distracted driver or an inebriated driver could easily, swerve over and hit somebody's on a bicycle. But this will have a curb, a stretch of grass, and then the path for bicycles and pedestrians to use. They're also going to tinker with the signaling on the traffic signals along Chapman, that stretch. In fact, just a new one was approved for Kern's food court there, and then so they're going to do that to help two things. First of all, traffic flow, it'll be easier that way, and then also make it easier for pedestrians to cross Chapman there. Chapman is notorious for pedestrians being hit. Had one pedestrian killed in this area of section of Chapman earlier this spring. And I had a nephew by marriage who was killed crossing Chapman Highway several years ago. It's one of those things that the city is trying to address through its Vision Zero initiative, which aims to eliminate traffic fatalities of all kinds by 2040 on city streets. This is one of the reasons they applied for this grant, and so it kind of fits into that overall structure. It's important to note that there's only spending over $20 million on this project, and it really only goes about 0.7 of a mile. Mm-hmm. It's actually a short stretch up to Fort Dickerson Park, and then from there on, Chapman Highway is still a dangerous place to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a motorist. So now they do have long-term plans to do upgrades to Chapman in 2 other phases from there to Stone Road, I believe, is where the other end would be, which is kind of the urbanized part of Chapman Highway, and but those haven't been funded yet, so that's something that will be way in the future. Now this is it's going to be interesting. This is the second year in a row the city's received one of these grants. They received an $8 million grant last year that's going to help fund safety improvements to Magnolia and Broadway in North Knoxville. So if I want to come visit you at your house, it'll make it easier for me to cross Broadway there.
Broadway can be a little dicey, and you have a lot of people who just sort of like dash out into the middle of traffic trying to get from one side to the other.
Oh yeah. It's a shorter stretch than Chapman's issues are, but boy, it's active.
Yeah.
So anyway, and it's the second major federal grant, transportation grant that the city's received this year. Because remember, earlier this year, the Department of Transportation awarded them a Connecting Communities grant of $42 million, which is supposed to help with greenways and other connectors from East Knoxville to other parts of the city. They were, basically to try to use infrastructure and design to overcome the scars of the physical scars of urban renewal and building a highway through the middle of a city. So that's like $60 million more or less between those 2 grants, right,
to the city.
And they missed out on a $25 million grant
for the pedestrian bridge. Yeah.
So they're on a roll as far as the Safe Streets grants, and I don't want to forget to mention that also in this round of funding from the Department of Transportation, KCDC got a $1.7 million grant to make it safer around Western Heights and Beaumont Elementary School. A lot of the Western Heights is a public housing community that's being that's going through a complete renovation project called Transforming Western. But a lot of the residents there don't have vehicles. It's almost entirely within the parental responsibility zone for Beaumont Magnet Academy. So a lot of kids on the streets, and so this is to just make it a little bit safer for them to get to and from school, essentially. And so KCDC is getting that grant. So yeah, it's and all of this funding is coming through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and so that's why all this money is available, and the city's getting a pretty decent share of it.
Right. All right. Well, Be interesting to see exactly how safe Chapman Highway can actually be made. But
yeah, and it's not
any improvement will be beneficial.
It's going to be a while too before anything gets going on it, because they have to do everything on this project from the get-go. They've got to acquire right of way for that bike path, and they've got to do all the design work and all of that, and so they don't think that it would be finished until late 2029 or early 2030. So
well after Kincannon has left office.
Well after Kincannon's left office, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's often the way these infrastructure projects go. They start under one administration, and if you're lucky, they finish under the next one. There have been projects that have spanned multiple administrations. All right, the one other thing I just kind of wanted to touch on this week, mostly because it's just kind of a juicy story, and it has a very strong Tennessee connection, not an East Tennessee connection, although a little bit of overlap with some of our elected officials, and that was this indictment that was unsealed this week by the U.S. Department of Justice. The people who were indicted were two Russian operatives, basically, who work for RT, which used to stand for Russia Today, I think, but is just generally referred to as RT. And it's the state-owned TV news network of the Russian government. RT itself has been widely labeled as a Russian propaganda operation back in 2017, when it was still active and available on a lot of American cable networks. The U.S. government required RT to register as a foreign agent, essentially saying you're really just a Russian propaganda arm. RT's American operations completely shut down in 2022, right at the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And they had already been sort of deplatformed widely before that. So RT does not really operate at that level in the United States anymore. But apparently what they did was they looked for other ways to influence the American media, one of which was this operation where they funneled close to $10 million in funding over the last several years to an American media company that I had never heard of until this past week, and I think probably most people had never heard of, called Tenet Media, TNET Media, headquartered in Nashville, in the Green Hills area. Apparently the office of record is in some office building in Green Hills. Unclear if there's actually any activity in that office. That company is apparently owned by a woman named Lauren Chen and her husband, Liam Donovan. She is a well-known kind of right-wing media figure. She's a contributor to Turning Point USA, to Blaze Media, these sort of like far-right Republican outlets that have gained a lot of prominence, especially sort of since the Trump era. And in fact, Turning Point USA, which she has been involved with, has a political advocacy arm called Turning Point Action that is serving as the get out the vote operation for the Trump campaign, the Trump presidential campaign. They kind of outsourced that function this year to that group. So she's somebody who's like, pretty well enmeshed within the current right-wing media landscape. And she and her husband ran this company. To be clear, neither one of them has been charged. At the moment, the only people who have been charged in connection with this are the two Russian operatives. They were charged with money laundering because they basically put this $10 million of Russian state money into this operation in Tennessee, and for failing to register as foreign agents. But what Tenet Media did was they had a little cluster of about a half dozen hand-picked right-wing commentators, podcasters, YouTubers, including some people with some pretty big followings. Tim Pool, who is a well-known name on, again, this is sort of like the the very online activist right, but he's a well-known presence there. He has close to 2 million followers on his YouTube channel. And then Benny Johnson, who's even more well-known than Poole, who has close to 3 million followers on his YouTube channel. So they were getting, decent reach with the stuff they were putting out. But basically, this money went into support and share pro-Russian messages across all of these platforms. And what does pro-Russian messaging look like in the current landscape? Well, especially a lot of it has to do with the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, trying to undermine American governmental support for Ukraine, because of course the U.S. has been providing a lot of money, resources, and weapons to the Ukrainian government, and to undermine and to promote support for the Russian state and Russian goals and so forth. And so, it's interesting. Tim Poole and Benny Johnson both came out and said, we had no idea about any of this. They were both paid a lot of money. Like the indictment spelled out that I can't remember which of them it was. One of them was getting a huge amount of money per month to do 4 weekly podcasts. The other one was getting paid $100,000 per episode that they were producing. So just significant amounts of money. Now, both of those guys have other revenue streams. They do have the reason I think they were chosen, they were recruited by Tenet Media, was because they had existing bases that the Russians wanted to reach. But stuff got pushed out through Tenet Media to them and then out to their audiences. And both Johnson and Poole have said they had no idea the money was coming from Russia and that it didn't affect their points of view at all. I guess that's the kind of thing that's a little bit hard to prove, but people very quickly unearthed footage of Poole, for example, saying very strongly that Ukraine is the greatest enemy the United States faces, and that the United States owes an apology to Russia, which is just out there defending its obvious interests. And Poole then quickly came out and said, "Oh, by the way, after all this came out this week, he came out and said, I was wrong about that. We need to support Ukraine." So, a little bit hard to know how much, and Lauren Chen and her husband, the people who actually own this company, have not said anything. Probably they are heavily lawyered up at this point, one would imagine. So, hard to know how much anybody might have known, but still, your best case scenario here is that this Tennessee media company and the people it was supporting were serving as puppets for Russian propaganda.
What the Russians call useful idiots.
Useful idiots, right. And the only real argument is, were they useful idiots, or did they actually have sort of some idea of what was going on and were okay with it for whatever reason? The sort of localish angle to this is that our own Congressman Tim Burchett, who, among other things, back when RT America was still on the air, Burchett went on there a lot, and he got some pushback at the time because it wasn't really a secret that RT was essentially a Russian propaganda operation. And at the time, Burchett just kind of said, "Well, I'm willing to talk to anybody. I don't care." He has been a guest on both Poole's and Johnson's outlets. Burchett himself has been a skeptic of support of Ukraine. And so, those are the kinds of Republican figures who were being pulled into these platforms that were being supported with millions of dollars of Russian money. That, not saying that Tim Burchett knew anything about that at all. Almost certainly he did not. Nevertheless, these are the kinds of pools, no pun intended, that some of our local officials have been waiting in. Yeah,
and that's one of the kind of hallmarks of kind of the Russian government that, and I only get this from reading. I don't have any inside scoop or anything, but the is they try to use people, encourage people, but they don't really necessarily hire people. So a lot of people do their bidding without realizing they're doing their bidding, and hence the term useful idiot. So
and we should note that there's plenty of evidence that Russians are not only targeting sort of like the right-wing side of the information sphere. There have also been efforts to stir up left-wing opposition to support for Ukraine, kind of under the guise of, this is American imperialism, kind of language that appeals more to people on the left. But the Russian state, I think, is mostly interested in promoting its own interests. They're not so to the degree they get involved in American politics, it's not because they're more Democratic or they're more Republican or whatever. They're just looking for people who will be useful to serving and willing to replicate and push out their messaging, essentially.
That into I think a good part would be to destabilize the United States a little bit.
Emphasize, look for points where there are divisions and try to make them more divided.
Right, absolutely.
So it was just interesting to see that the first story I saw on it didn't, because the indictment didn't identify the media company. It just said American media company based in Tennessee, and then other reporting very quick. It provided an awful lot of detail about the company, so it wasn't hard for people to go out and identify it. But the first story I saw just referred to a Tennessee media company, and I had a brief flash of wondering why nobody had come to talk to us about it.
I know, nobody's offered us $1 million to subsidize the podcast.
I mean, to keep it accurate, they would have had to offer me the $1 million to pay you guys to do some work.
That's
but
right.
I'm not saying I would say no to that either. I always love the fact that 9 times out of 10, if Tennessee makes national news, it's usually not something we're proud of.
Yeah. It's we're an interesting state.
Yes, we are.
What can you say? Okay, looking ahead to the coming week, Scott. Couple of things on the horizon. The Planning Commission will have its monthly meeting on Thursday. What's up there?
Yeah, well, it's a long agenda full of rezonings and special use requests and typical things like that. And one thing that probably need to emphasize this a little bit more is that at this point, we're doing this on Friday, taping this on Friday. The meeting is next Thursday at 1:30 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building. A lot of items can get withdrawn, postponed, all kinds of things put on the consent agenda so it's not discussed, those kinds of things. So it's a little tricky to cast ahead to some, but there was one interesting a couple of interesting items. One, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with County Commissioner Andy Fox and density. Developer Scott Davis has about 28 acres on Tipton Station Road in South Knox County, and it's currently zoned to allow 3 dwelling units per acre. 3 houses per acre, so basically. And he's wanting to double the density to 6, and he's going to County Commission to get approval for that. Planning staff has said okay, and they're fine with it. And so if Commission passes that, then when it goes to County Commission, be interesting to see.
Yeah, that could be one of the first big tests of the new Commission makeup and how they're going to handle these.
Yeah, because Fox is dead set against increasing density, especially in South Knox County. There's another kind of interesting to me, and little connection to something that recently happened. Last week at City Council, Council barely approved a townhouse development for the intersection of, or the area where Middlebrook Pike and Galahar View Road intersect. It's the very northwestern corner of West Hills. The West Hills Community Association vehemently opposed it.
West Hills is opposed to development?
Well, yes, especially if it is anything more than a single family house, and they almost got it. It was a 5-4 vote to approve that, but it just so happens that at Planning Commission, on the other side of Galahar View, and just a little ways down, not very far though. You can throw a rock from there to this location on old Middlebrook Pike. A developer's wanting to build an 18-unit townhouse facility. One huge difference there is that's in the county, not in the city, and the West Hills Neighborhood or Community Association has a lot more clout in the city than it does in the county. So, but I just thought it was interesting that we've got these are two. So basically, it'll be almost 40 condominiums that are being approved or could be approved. Just at essentially around one intersection. So,
well, and that is interesting thinking about that stretch of Galahar View there, because it is actually a kind of undeveloped little corridor in West Knoxville, West Knox County, surrounded by tons of development.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it is getting built up, and there is already a ton of multifamily housing around there as well.
Yeah.
So
One of the things that was interesting is I said this is the northwest corner of. Or the one that council approved was at the northwest corner of West Hills, and they were talking about how West Hills is almost entirely single family housing, and that's true. But there, if you go south on Galahar View to the southwestern corner of West Hills, very dense apartment complex down there, and so it's right at the edges, and that's the way that kind of the planners are looking at development now. Is that along the streets and at these intersections, that's where you're going to have to build up things. Not only commercial but residential, and then not so much encroach on single family residences in the hearts of these neighborhoods, but the edges are
that's
increasingly
density is recommended.
Increasingly, the edges are fair game.
Yeah,
and then I've got a couple other little quick things that are religiously connected in the city. One is the Life Church Knoxville's going to build a new sanctuary up in North Knoxville off Cedar Lane. They're seeking approval for that. And the other thing, we were talking about Ukraine. There is a Ukrainian church here in Knoxville. It is St. Thomas the Apostle Byzantine Catholic Church, and it's in North Knoxville off Buffett Mill Road, and they are seeking permission to build a little house for their priest. So anyway,
I wonder what Tenet Media would have to say.
I don't know. And there was even another church-related rezoning request on the agenda, but it's going to be postponed. Victim of what I said before, things change pretty quickly sometimes when it comes to items on the Planning Commission agenda.
Sure. And then also this coming week, a couple of meetings kind of from somewhat different perspectives about the upcoming city charter referendum, right?
Yeah, the people are starting to hold, council members in particular, are starting to hold these informational meetings to get people to understand what's going on with the charter referendum. If you haven't been listening and you don't know, there will be a referendum question for city voters on the November ballot. asking if they want to establish an election system where all the candidates are at-large seats, or all the seats are selected on at-large basis. Those 6 of them would have kind of district residency requirements, but voters citywide would vote both the primary and general election for those seats. A yes vote establishes that. A no vote changes the city's election process anyway, but it makes all of these seats district only, so only people who live in the district can vote in the primary and in the general election for those 6 seats. Anyway, the Andrew Roberto, council member who represents West Knoxville, who is the one who kind of championed the change, which they have to do something because state law requires that the city can't maintain its current system. But he was the champion of the referendum question at 6 p.m. Thursday at Bearden United Methodist Church on Sutherland Avenue. He's going to be holding one of these informational meetings. And like I said, he is a supporter of it. If you want to talk to people who are on the other side of it at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon at Clinton Chapel, Amy Zion Church in Mechanicsville, Councilmember Amelia Parker is hosting an event. She is not a fan of at-large voting, believes that has the potential to truly limit the political strength of minority communities, particularly the African American community. So she is probably at this point the loudest voice on the vote no side of this, and so but she's having that meeting at 3 o'clock Saturday.
Right, so you could go to both meetings and kind of hear
both sides. Yes, and and that's one of the things is that here is getting people, city voters, to realize that that's going to be on the ballot and what it means.
Yeah,
because
it's a little complicated. It
is complicated, and because it's a presidential election, more people will be voting. People who may not typically vote in city elections,
more low information voters, as they call them.
So, it is important, I think, for people to educate themselves on what's going on, because this is how we select. I live in the city, so I can say that, how we select our city leaders.
Yep. All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about those things and anything else that happens in the interim. See if we learn anything new about Seth Barber's connections to foreign funding sources.
Well, he's got that beard. That's kind of that's a Rasputin-y beard he's got.
Looks like a bit of a Cossack, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. But
that's where I stash all the cash.
For now, we will say thank you to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.